Hi guys, I hope you're all doing well. We're here for another episode of The Gibson Show, and today I am joined by FancyPixel, who is the brain when it comes to everything MENA. Fancy, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Gibson? It's really nice to be here finally after like all the chats we've been in seeing each other in like every tournament and finally nice to meet you at last.
It is. Look, I always look for new guests to come on the show and to talk about things, and you reached out to me directly because you were like, hey, the MENA region needs more love. We need more people to get an idea of what is going on. So, first off, why don't you tell all the viewers at home a little bit about the MENA region?
Sure. Let me, of course, first introduce myself to whoever doesn't know me. My name is FancyPixel. I'm a Rainbow Six Siege coach, analyst, and I do sometimes on-air talent as well. I've done a lot of things. I've been in the MENA region. I went out of the MENA region. I went in South Asia, coached GK, coached Shaheens, and multiple teams in between.
And obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, Shaheens compete in the South Asia region, and they got some love last year. They played really well in the regular stage of the season, but unfortunately just weren't able to get it over the line when it came to the playoffs time. But I suppose the main thing that we want to talk about today is MENA itself, right? So 2 to 3 years ago, nobody globally really knew anything about the MENA region. You didn't have any real pathway towards international tournaments. There was no Stage 1 league. And then a big event came up called Gamers 8, which Falcons from your region performed incredibly at. They made it all the way to the final. As somebody from that region, how important was it for Gamers 8 to give an opportunity to a team from MENA to show what they could do on a global stage?
Yeah, Gamers 8 was a catalyst for the region. It was just the right thing at the right time. It was exactly what we needed as a region to show people that we got it what it takes to compete globally, like because as we saw like Falcons doing this took a lot of teams by surprise. At that time TSM, who was like just winning after SI, and there was a little bit of struggle from TSM, but still, like you winning against the world champion, and not only this Gamers 8, like the both if in both uh, like in both versions of Gamers 8, you won against G2 and you won against TSM. Like this on its own was just the right thing for the region and the right exposure for all of us, because we needed this more than anything, and this was just the right thing.
And there was kind of like a stereotype in Europe going into that event that most players from MENA, all they did was play on high ping and swing everything. But whenever they got to play them on LAN, people kind of went, hold on a second, these are actually very good players. And obviously, as you, for a coach, how difficult was it coaching a team, teams and players from that region before it became a tier 1 spot? Because you probably weren't getting the best quality of scrims, were you?
Yeah, because most of the time before that, we never had our server. So the only option we had is either Asia or EU. But most of the time it was EU servers and EU scrims. Most of the time, even we couldn't compete or like scrim against like the top teams, because they thought of us and of like they're not really something, and they don't have that reputation to like okay, let's try those teams, maybe we can get out of them a good practice. And they didn't have that image. We didn't have that image because there was nothing to support our case, because we didn't have Gamers 8 back in like 2 3 years ago. We didn't have any league, as you said. Like all of that didn't help us to showcase what can we do. So the quality of the scrims was actually not always on point, but sometimes it also from each time, and every now and a while we get like maybe a challenger league team back in the days or something like that. We get some recognition or some teams that accept, because as you said, the ping factor was a little bit pain, because people back in the day didn't want to do this. They think this is too high of a ping and this is too much. You guys are going to swing everything, which is of course somewhat true, but this became actually our style because of the ping. Like back in the days, all the tournaments that we had locally was actually on EU servers. So this adapted like our play style, and we made like all of this our style. We, because of the hyping, and we got used to this. Even when we started playing LAN and we started playing normally, like with a low ping in our server, this still became the style. This carried on.
It's definitely a fun style to work, and it has had some success internationally. Like we've seen Falcons and GK in the last, year and a half both perform really well in majors. GK really, really upset things. They beat W7M, one of the few teams globally to do that over the course of last year. So as we look towards MENA for 2024, obviously there's been some roster changes. Falcons have stolen a player from GK. I'm sure a lot of people will be aware of, as Hasham, I believe, was the guy who's gone over, who's nuts, by the way. Like, when you watch him play, he is him at times. But outside of GK and Falcons, there's a lot of talent, right? You've got teams like Twisted Minds and a couple of other teams taking part inside of the Saudi E-League right now. What's the outlook for MENA in 2024? And are there any other teams that kind of can upset the balance of those top two?
Yeah, as you said, 2024 came with, especially after the SI, the changes and the roster, because our region is more of like a small family. We all the players know all the players, all the teams know all the teams. So we always have that casual changes of roster. This has always been the case since day one. We always have that change of people going from this team to this team, from the big team number one to the number two, and number two to number one. Always we've been doing that. I think like this year we'll have a little bit of a challenge, because especially after the changes that both teams, Falcons and GK, made, it will make a lot of room for other teams like Twisted Minds maybe, or there is Onyx Ravens also coming a little bit, who was previously triple but they modified a little bit. So all of this will change the taste of the region this year, I think.
And do you think it's a good thing that teams like GK and Falcons have brought in players at times from outside of the region? Obviously, Seriously and Blaz. Blaz, of course, who's incredibly experienced, will be joining that team. Do you see that as a good thing for the region to get some more experience in? And do you think that will maybe drive the other teams to make some more international signings too, to improve the region even further?
Yeah, definitely, because as we saw, adding players, we needed a catalyst from other teams or other regions. We sometimes lack the experience of having someone who is knowledgeable of the other regions, because not only you playing against them in scrims is enough, but also the idea of having a player from the other regions is perfect, and it's much needed. A very, very good example of that, when GK got Noodle and got leader, even though he was like only temporary, but that showed the effect that we need. We needed something like that. It was just the right thing to do at that time.
And you're able to attract in some very good coaches as well. Obviously, a good friend of mine is Marlon, or Twister. He stepped in for SI for Falcons. And honestly, I have a lot of high hopes for this region. Like, I think when you consider how little love MENA got for a long time, the fact that both teams won games internationally and qualified through each, a couple of stages at the majors is a really good sign for the future growth. And looking at 2024, it does seem that there's going to be wildcard spots at some of the events, and I know that OCE, I think, have the extra spot going into the first major. If I think Dev was the one who was talking about that. Do you feel like MENA is one of the teams that really could potentially earn that wildcard spot for the second major, and we could see maybe GK and Falcons or Twisted Minds, or like you said, the old triple roster getting in?
Yeah, that could happen, because as I said, the whole roster changes that we do, we're not done because we're still not close. We're almost close to the next MENA league, so there will be more changes before the league itself starts. So there will be more changes that I think will spice things up, and that also will help the region develop as well into international competition, getting out of the league itself. So that point will be a very important point as long as it's done right.
Yeah. So I suppose the next question is kind of the last one I'm going to ask about MENA for now is when you look at some of the regions that people would see you guys as competing with at the start, you know, like Asia, OCE, you know, LATAM. Some of the things that a lot of these regions have done is they've had teams that have captured like a fan base outside of that region. Like, you know, CAG have a huge fan base outside of Japan. You've got obviously Damwon have a big fan base outside of Korea. What do you think that MENA teams can do to grow their international fan base? Because obviously people love CAG because of their style of play. It's like, wow, this is so much fun to watch. For MENA teams, do you think it's going to be the case of, yeah, really exciting players, people like XG, Hashim, you know, Jalad, people like that just popping off and getting fans for the players themselves? Or do you think it's something else that could be done to grow a fan base for these teams?
I think we still lack the idea of monetizing showing ourselves outside of the region, because players and teams get a little in their own comfort space in our region. Especially they feel like going out and showing publicity and trash talking other teams or trash talking other orgs, stuff like that, we're not really good at, or we don't do that a lot. I think if we do that a lot or a little bit more on the course of maybe the next major and the other international events that's upcoming, this will be a good point of like getting publicity for the region and for the teams. Showing showing stuff like this is very important, because like you mentioned CAG. We always know every time we see CAG and we just like say CAG is cagging, and we know what we mean by that. So it shows that. So doing that, and we even not it became like a term in our in overall in the scene, that when we see someone is doing that, we say, oh, this team is cagging. Yeah. So it became like that. So we need a little bit more of the being like showing our region and showing our style of even memes and stuff like that. We need to get that out more. Maybe that's not our strongest suit, but still.
Yeah, well, I know that Valentino got some fans as well with his interviews, particularly at the first major last year. He in Copenhagen, he had some very good interviews with Ginny on the desk. But let's talk a bit more about you again. So you're obviously a coach, and the other region that you coached in was South Asia. And for those of you who are watching this who don't know, South Asia and Southeast Asia are kind of one larger region that's been split into two sides. So South Asia has a mini league, Southeast Asia has a mini league, and then the top teams from those qualify to the South Asian qualifiers, at which teams can qualify then for, the major and SI. So Shaheen's obviously are a team from South Asia. So first off, why don't you talk to us about how you got that job at the first place and how you developed that team? Obviously you're not there anymore, but you had a huge part in their development. So talk us through that whole process.
Yeah, Shaheen, of course, was a very important point for me. I wanted to taste things outside of the MENA region, and I was approached by Envy. Shout out to him. Of course, he's one of the greatest players I saw in South Asia. He was actually playing with me and another team just to play for the Saudi A-League qualifiers, and this was just a tournament. He wanted to play for fun because he was in Saudi, and then we decided to play that tournament. Unfortunately, we didn't qualify, and then after that he said, okay, let's try this. How about you can coach us? We have this team, we have this stage, we were trying to achieve something. I said, okay, yeah, let's do it. We went in, first stage, flawless. It was flawless, and but that was it. As the last chance qualifier, we weren't able to perform as we did, because of course it was still a little bit stress of a situation, because facing big teams, and we still didn't have the way to prove our experience, and that was the problem a little bit. And then I decided to move on and try to move with another challenge, and the team, we both of us had a different idea in mind, so everyone went in his own way. But they still, in the second stage, they still went in and they still performed the same way that we expected them to do, and it was great seeing them doing that.
Yeah, well, there's that really good rivalry between Shaheens and Monkey Hunters over the course of last year where the games got really tight. I think one of the things that I always loved about watching Shaheens, though, was the players were enjoying the opportunity to play at the tier 1 level. Like, Envy in particular was a player that I loved watching. What was it like, coaching those players? And again, I'd probably say, as much as it was probably hard to get good quality scrims in MENA, was it even more difficult in South Asia?
Yeah, actually, because the servers in Asia was still a little bit difficult, because the players themselves were a little bit. Most of them was in Pakistan, so it was a little bit difficult, and most of the time the Asian server was not a good option to them. So we either had to go into MENA teams, or we just try to go hyping and go into the Asia server. So that was actually more of a challenge, because even EU, Europe completely was out of the question, because that was not going to be an option for both of us, even for the European teams. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but we tried to adapt, and we work with what we have.
And anybody who follows sports in general will know that there's a massive competition between India and Pakistan, right? If you follow sports, you know it's a big deal. Obviously, Hunters are from an Indian side, and Shaheens are from Pakistan. Did it mean a lot to those players to beat Hunters compared to maybe beating some of the other teams?
Yeah, because of course it meant a lot, because not only the two teams knowing each other and the rivalry between the teams, it also meant, like, this game can completely change everything in the league, knowing that those are the main competitors. Not saying the other teams was not competitors, of course, but that there is always that team that if you get over, yeah, you will be in a much more comfortable stage in the whole league. So that was the main challenge. We always needed to focus on that team, because we know we have to showcase ourselves, especially in that match.
And I was speaking with Odin last year. So Odin, of course, was coaching Direwolves for a while. And at the time, he expressed that the biggest problem that the APAC region, as it was called at the time, had was a lot of the players in Asia and South Asia and Southeast Asia in particular were part-time. They had jobs that they had to work during the day. Some of them were at university studying. Is that still as much of a challenge? And do you see the region doing anything to address that? Because it will make things difficult if players from those teams are working 7-8 hours on one job and then coming home to scrim and practice and study. Whereas in like EU, NAL, these players are fully locked in 8 hours a day, playing the game, studying the game.
Yeah, actually, this is one of the reasons I think the development of the whole Asia area is a little bit challenge to them, because the problem is facing challenges like this and not having all the time, or like more time like other regions, was an actual problem, because you need to know, like, you need a little bit of a scrim, you need to dry run, you need to explain strats, you need to do a lot of things, and sometimes you can't do that even if it's aligned with you. Like, okay, let's say we have a schedule, this day we need to explain this strat, and we have to dry run, and we have to play the 2 scrims today, and then someone comes, whoops, I have an exam, and then you have to cancel or reschedule or play a scrim at very late nights, and all of that was a challenge, and still is. I think also this is one of the reasons that makes the players overall in Asia a little bit I can say I don't want to call it unexperienced, but this is where it makes a difference between Asia and other regions, because the more you scrim and the more you practice and the more tournaments you play, of course, the more outcome you will do and the more knowledgeable and strong you will be. But because of those challenges, it was a little bit difficult.
And then when you consider the fact that on the other side of the bracket, on the Southeast Asia side, you've got some very good rosters. You know, we just saw Bleed. Like, the fragging power that they have is mental. Fury have qualified for most events. You know, Fury from the APAC region, they're usually there or thereabouts when we get to majors. Dire Wolves also another team that have loads of experience internationally. Not to mention now that Elevate have made some additions. You know, they brought in MC and Shed, who are two players I know very well because I've casted them all the way from Uni Siege up through Tier 3 into Tier 2, and now they're getting opportunity in Tier 1 as well. What does South Asia have to do to keep up with the changes now that Southeast Asia are making? Because it looks like the pathway to qualifying looks more difficult than ever.
Actually, I think because now the changes that's been made in this stage, like before last year, it was a little bit separate, and you have to win your league, and then you have to win LCQ, and then you have to win another LCQ to qualify to the major. All of that was a little bit problematic because you have to go through all the way, and then you you face one of the teams that are perfect and they're ready. They're more ready because they know they have more experience, and that was the problem. But I think the way things are set up now, this stage at least, maybe this stage won't show as much of the results needed, but I think combining the South Asia into the Asia and just removing the complete South Asia League and everything, doing this will actually give South Asian teams an exposure of actually doing good matches and doing their best, because they know they're not going to be like, oh, we will play a little bit of matches and then we qualify, it's fine. They know that from day one, it's on, it's business. This is the deal. This is the thing that we need to focus on. Facing Bleed, facing Elevate, facing every big name that you already been seeing for the past a lot. Like, will be a very interesting challenge to see.
And it's more games too. So the more games you get, the better you're going to be in the long scale of things too. Like, I think you look at Hunters and Shaheens when South Asia was South Asia, they lost one game over the course of 2 stages. It was a bit mental how well they were able to perform. So I think this can only help teams like that get better and better as we go into 2024. Look, I'm done talking about leagues. I'm done talking about Asia. I want to talk about you. So first off, you've done a bit of everything at this point. You spoke about it. You'd done a bit of playing. You'd coached. You've been on-air talents as well. So first off, I want to talk about the coaching side of things. I'm very interested in the way coaches work, because you know as well as I do, there's so many different philosophies. You've got, some coaches that are very autocratic. They like to be, the be all and end all, the buck stops with them. You've got some coaches that are maybe a lot more about, coaching individual players, getting everyone to be their best. Some coaches are more team focused. What's your philosophy when it comes to coaching?
So my style of coaching is a little bit complicated, I like to call it, because I like to do things very on point. I like to do things, I want things to be just as they are. And that gets into a little bit of the players, because some of the players won't understand. Like, if I put a trap in some area or I put a certain reinforcement, when I'm explaining that, some players wouldn't understand like the reasoning behind it, which causes a little bit of a challenge. But in the end, when we practice and we scrim and I show them what I do and why did I do it that way, it becomes a little bit clear. And of course, I like to be a little bit flexible in that part, because I know what I do in theory is not going to work 100% of the time. So sometimes I like to adapt and see what can be done to be changed in the strat as well.
So you saying that you adjust your strat, like would you do a lot of adjusting of what your strat book is for a play day based on who you're playing? Like do you do a lot of VOD review and counter what the other team does, or do you try to enable your team to be better at what they do?
I like always the philosophy of if you're good at something, you focus on it. If you're good at a certain map, take it and just excel on it. If you focus on your weak points, you're not going to be as best, but you need to know where are your weak points and work on them, but you need to be also aware of the points that you're good at. The points that you're good at are the points which is going to win you the games, win you the teams that you think you wouldn't win against. Sometimes you would need a certain counter strat for a team, which I've done before, is just a strat for this team only. You play against this team and you play against them only this time and this map, and that's it. This strat you never see the light of of day again, because sometimes you actually need to do that.
So when you look back at what you've done as a coach, what are you more happy about? The way you developed players and made them better, or the victories? Which way is heavier on your mind?
Of course, the helping the players. But helping the players always feels a little bit of leaves something in you, because when you're helping the players, and even if you leave the team or the players leave the team, when you see them play again and they do something, you know that you taught them that is something else. You feel like a sense of like, yeah, this is my student. I taught him that, and he knows how to do this because I sat with him and did that. The victories are always great and always welcomed, but nothing beats the feeling of like, this is my student and I was with him day one.
And when you look back at all the players you've coached, who's that player that you look back on kind of most fondly, that you either developed the most or was just the most fun to be around and helped you the most as a coach?
Oh, that's a, that's a trick question. I believe I had there is one player that stands out. I think his name is Mantical. He was in XGK, if you remember him. He was playing with GK the stage one. I played with him in a different team before it. That was Tor VA. That was a that was my first team to play with, and he's just the player that you need. He's an entry player. He gets what an entry and a roamer does. He just gets that. And also when he's the one who argues with me in the strats. Like we argue with the strats a lot, and that was something that I needed to improve, because it's not you as a coach, you don't always get something 100% correct unless you see it from the player's perspective, which is the adaptability I was talking about. Sometimes you need to argue with the players and see what their point of view is. When they talk about that, this is the point you need to do. You need to address that change, because they are not comfortable. They think this is something better. They see something that you don't see usually, which is the point was needed.
And then looking at the other regions, is there any region that you'd love to try coaching in, whether it's tier 1, whether it's tier 2, whether it's assisting, you know, kind of an analyst role? Like, does the idea of working in a different region, is that something that speaks to you?
Yeah, definitely. I would love to challenge myself in Europe sometimes. I think my style would be perfect in Europe. I think it would be just the right place to me, because I was always called that in MENA region. I was always called the person who have the heavy strats that's always suitable for Europe. So I think sometime soon, maybe I would love to go to Europe and see the region overall.
It would be really nice to see you come over and you know, continue your pathway as a coach. But another thing that you do is on-air talent. So, you know, you spoke to me about it before. You've been on analyst desks. What do you enjoy about that side of things? Because that's kind of my forte. I love casting. Any opportunity I get, I'm always down. Obviously, I wasn't involved last stage as much as I would have liked to. I did get to work a couple of play days in Asia, which was a lot of fun. But casting and being on the desk is something that's very different. So how did you find that?
I think it's a really great opportunity overall, being an analyst and being able to just look and tell people, the viewers, how did this round go, or what did this player do, or did this team do. All of that feels great because you're not only talking to experienced players, because you have to know that sometimes there are people who are still watching the game for their first tournament or their first match ever. You need to know how to mix between explaining something that's very complex to someone who already understands everything, to someone who just understands the game casually. This whole area is a very interesting thing for me because I would love always to let people know what the esports side of the game is. It's not always just the ranked and the casual and everything, but it's always this feeling of competition and seeing players play it in a different way completely.
And it's actually a lot of fun when I watch some of the broadcasts from that region. Obviously, I don't speak a word of Arabic whenever I'm watching those broadcasts, but people like there's another Fancy, which I think is great. We've got two Fancy people who work on the desk.
We always fight.
Yeah,
me and him.
But there's a lot of passion. Like if you watch one of those broadcasts, there's so much passion that those guys bring. But do you feel that there should be English broadcasts of MENA as well? And if there is, do you believe that people like you and all of the guys who do the production in MENA can't speak fluent English? Because I've met them all. Do you feel like they should get an opportunity to put MENA out there in English so it reaches a wider audience?
Yeah, definitely. This is part of the exposure we need. I think getting an English stream for our games and for the league would help a lot of letting people understand our region, letting people know the players, letting people know the team. This would actually build a fan base over the fan base outside of the region, because this is much needed as a region for for people like us who not getting always the recognition we get for we're looking for, because sometimes it's the language barrier, because people don't understand what's happening in the region. And we're a little community, as I said. We're always been like a small family of people. Everyone knows everyone, every team knows every team. So getting someone from the outside looking at us and giving us the exposure into another language is definitely needed.
Well, I know that Whippet and I have expressed interest before in doing an English cast of MENA, because, look, us too. We love casting, and obviously, I think MENA is something we feel a little bit attached to because we worked Gamers 8. It was our first ever big opportunity in front of a global audience. So, if the opportunity ever arose for us to cast MENA English, we'd be down. But again, it would only be if we're working. If people from MENA are getting that opportunity to cast in English too, because I know you'd be fantastic on the desk. Fancy's got the other. I'd love actually the two of you on the same broadcast, just to get that in English, because we're like, Fancy, so tell me this, and both of you start talking at the same time. But it'd be a lot of fun. It certainly would. So I think the last kind of question for you, because we're getting kind of close on time, is 2024. What's next for you? What's next for FancyPixel?
What's next for FancyPixel? You're gonna see me a lot more on the screen. You're gonna see me more on the desk and on the analyst desk, and maybe who knows? Who knows? Maybe you'll see me behind the 5 players shouting and in the EU, and just doing as usual coaching. Yeah, you'll see me. Hopefully, you'll see me more on the screen. You'll see me more on the screen and off the screen, like behind the players. Hopefully, that will be happening.
And which MENA team do you think is most likely to qualify for the Manchester Major?
That's a tricky question, because it's a bit early to judge, because I think there is still more changes and window transfers going to happen for other teams. Maybe. I'm not saying anything, but I'm saying there definitely will be changes before the league hits. So it's going to be an interesting league this time.
It should be, and if you look back, even though it was kind of mainly a 2-horse race last year between GK and Falcons, I think there will be more competition from the rest of the region, because those teams will have learned a lot too by just playing against Falcons and UK and what they learned at international events. So finally, I do have one last question for you, right? So we spoke about 2024, we spoke about all your experience on broadcast. The last thing I want to talk about is Gamers 8. It's rebranded now. It's the Esports World Cup. There's a really big push from the region to get more fans into the venue. What would you say to people out there about coming to MENA, watching some Siege at the highest level, and seeing what I can only say is one of the best produced tournaments out there?
Yeah, I want to say, people, you need to watch out on that tournament, because this is going to be one big event, if not like one of the biggest, because we saw what happened in Brazil, and we saw how SI happened, and the Brazilian fans are always was insane, even though for someone who didn't even go there, it was still insane. So I would even believe being there is something else. So I would believe the feelings, all of this is going to be reproduced, and even maybe a little bit more in the World Cup, having a lot of teams from all the regions, and having not only the best, but just like everyone from every place combined is just going to be everything we've been hoping for. So keep an eye out.
And it's only going to keep getting bigger and bigger. We're lucky to have Siege as part of that tournament. But look, Fancy, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I know that we've been trying for a few weeks to get this done. We finally did get it, and obviously I'd love to talk to you a lot more over the coming weeks offline too. But it's been so much fun. Thank you for joining. I hope you have a great stage. I hope we see lots of you on our screens. And if you do get the chance to coach, I hope you grab it with both arms and make the most of it.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Gibson, for this, and I would love to see you soon.
Thank you. And for the viewers at home, if you haven't already, make sure to give Fancy a follow on his Twitter to keep up to date with what everybody's doing. Actually, I suppose I should say X now, shouldn't I? Not Twitter. But why don't you let everyone know where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or X, and I still call it Twitter as well. So you can find me on Twitter, Pixel Fancy. That's my handle. And if anyone wants anything, advice or something, free to join to talk with me. I don't mind. And yeah, if any teams is looking for coaches and analysts, I'm your guy.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Fancy, and we'll see you all next time for the next episode of The Gibson Show.